Hello. The Winter Olympic Games were held in Italy from the 6th to the 22nd of February at a time of pollution-fuelled global heating, with the mountains warming at twice the rate of lowland areas, putting the whole of winter sport in crisis. I'm Matt Rendell and I was reporting from Italy for the New Weather Institute and the Cool Down Network on the Games, the environment and the international movement to have advertising and sponsorship from high polluters kicked out of sport, which perhaps we think of as the sort of thing our communities are founded on, although many people I spoke to in Italy saw the Games as a top-down frenzy of mega construction, financialisation, deforestation and the promotion of some highly questionable sponsors. Now, I produced 17 reports, one for every day of the Olympics, and you can still find them online. Here are some of the headline stories. Unlike Calgary, Canada, where 56.4% of voters said no to their bid for the 2026 Games, or Sion, Switzerland, where 54% of voters did the same, no one in Italy had the opportunity to vote either way. Hardly surprising. The last time an Olympic bid actually won a referendum was in Vancouver as long ago as 2003 for the 2010 Winter Games. In 2019, the Milan Cortina bid pledged the most sustainable and memorable Games ever, the words sustainable and sustainability occurring 134 times in the bid proposal, a lot for a controversial event in a long history of events that have tended to overpromise and underdeliver.
Gentili viaggiatori e viaggiatrici, chiediamo la vostra cortese attenzione.
They were also the most widely distributed Olympics in history, whose appellation Milano Cortina 2026 ignored other Olympic venues like Livigno and Bormio, Baselga, Tesero and Predazzo, and north of Cortina, Anterselva, alone among the 6 unnamed venues in actually having a railway station, which put in perspective the Games' sustainability director's insistence that the primary mode of transport during the Games was rail. Bormio and Tesero are, like Cortina, an hour by road and Livigno 2 hours from the nearest train connection. Clearing snow in a Bormio side street, Massimo told me,
tutta una serie di cose messe insieme ha fatto sì che adesso non c'è tantissima gente, che da una parte ti dico bene per chi si vuole godere la montagna, dall'altra parte è logico che sotto il profilo economico, non so, per quelli che sono le botteghe, i negozi, le attività diciamo familiari così, non è assolutamente un bene perché insomma sono 2 o 3 settimane dove
normalmente
si guadagna tanto, no? È normale che un'attività in queste 3 settimane fa un bel fatturato che è quello che poi gli permette magari anche di andare avanti nei mesi diciamo più magri come può essere a un certo punto marzo o poi maggio, ecco.
February in a normal year means carnival boom time for the hospitality sector. Whether it was the convoluted transport, the lack of publicity, or the price hikes, people in Bormio and Livigno reported that this February's bookings were down 60 to 70%. In Cortina, Town Councillor Roberta De Zanna explained how the Games had deprived the townsfolk of important social services.
Abbiamo perso molti servizi a causa di queste Olimpiadi, la scuola Montessori, il servizio del veterinario è stato molto in forse perché è stato spostato.
Because of these Olympics, we have lost many services. The Montessori school, the local vet has been moved twice because it was where the cable car is being built. And the Games won't solve Cortina's problems. For the people who work here and would like to start a family here, starting with the people born here, the biggest problem is finding a home.
A cominciare dai giovani di Cortina stessi, perché i prezzi sono inaccessibili.
Rents are unaffordable. Last year, 17 children were born here. What does the future hold for them in Cortina?
With the local press speaking of €1 billion in foreign capital flooding in, Cortina risked becoming an oasis of B&Bs and second homes, with local people forced out of town.
Quello che ci servirebbe come legacy sportiva, che che ci avevano già promesso con i mondiali.
During the Ski World Championships at Cortina in 2021, we were promised the swimming pool would reopen. We're still waiting. There's a sport that's good for everyone, young and old. We've been waiting 13 years. There are plans and finance, but the work still hasn't started. We are good for curling and bobsleigh, but we're still waiting for some sport facilities which would actually be good for the whole community.
Effettivamente sarebbe uno sport adatto a tutti, che è il nuoto, ancora lo stiamo aspettando. Gli aspetti più controversi sono stati la pista da bob.
And the most controversial part is the bobsleigh track, imposed from outside against the will of many local people.
Doveva costare 47 milioni di euro mettere a posto la vecchia pista.
Repairing the old bobsleigh track was supposed to cost 47 million euros. Instead, they demolished it and built a new one for 120 million, maybe more, we'll see, with the loss of a lot of forest.
In February 2024, 560 larch trees, some of them 160 years old, were felled to make way for the top end of the bobsleigh run. On the first Saturday of the Games, demonstrators in central Milan staged a Larches on the March protest against the needless destruction. But perhaps the most memorable protest of the entire Games was made by the concert cellist Mario Brunello 2 years earlier in the forest itself, surrounded by workers with chainsaws.
Gli alberi non hanno una voce che può essere compresa dagli umani.
Trees don't have a voice that humans can understand, and they were about to be cut down. They were about to die. And I thought that my cello, which is a wooden body, could be their friend and lend its voice to ask for mercy.
Per chiedere pietà. Mi sembra che le Olimpiadi, un evento così di importanza planetaria, è anche così importante per la civiltà degli umani.
It seems to me that the Olympics, an event of such planetary importance, so important for human civilization, have on this specific occasion shown little respect for the nature that was hosting them.
E chi ci andava di mezzo non erano solo gli uomini che vivono lì.
And the affected were not only the people who live there, who will lose 2 centuries of history that those magnificent larch trees have lived, and will lose a picture in one of the most beautiful valleys on the planet, because they say, yes, we cut them down, but we'll plant trees somewhere else.
Certo, meno male.
I mean, of course, thank goodness they're planting, but this is where the disaster happened. All right, these trees, these human lives, human because they saw humans every day, they couldn't say anything, they couldn't rebel. And so I thought that music could somehow make their last cry heard.
Quando siamo arrivati,
When we arrived, they were starting to cut. Then they stopped for I don't know what moment of mercy, but the chainsaws were at work, so it was like entering a concentration camp.
è come essere entrato in un campo di concentramento, ecco, nell'epoca nazista.
And if the environmental costs in lost woodland and concrete are staggering, the future running costs are an open question.
Sappiamo di sicuro che costerà.
It will cost at least $1.5 million per year to maintain. There may be revenue from sponsors and teams, but Cortina will be paying a lot of it.
Di questa spesa graverà sul comune di Cortina.
The 1956 ski jump already lies stranded outside Cortina, which risks becoming a graveyard of surplus winter sports behemoths. The architect, historian and environmentalist Dr. Barnabas Calder is an expert in the carbon costs of construction projects.
The decision about whether to go ahead with anything, but building projects are a major example of it. And one of the most spectacular ways you can save environmental harm is to not go ahead with a building project. There is almost no situation in which not building something new is environmentally the wrong decision.
The last Winter Olympics in Italy, Turin 2006, illustrated exactly how not to go about building for a sports mega-event. They were offered the use of the bobsleigh run at La Plagne in France, built for Albertville 1992. So it was a political choice to build the new facility at Cesana Pariol, which opened in 2005. It cost €110 million, plus €1.5 million in annual running costs for 2 months a year, and closed in 2011 after about 10 days of competition per year. The ski jumps built for Turin 2006 closed even earlier, after 5 years with about 6 days of competition per year. Like the bobsleigh run at Cesana Pariol, they're being scrapped. All that steel and concrete, all that energy overspend, for nothing.
The problem of people justifying enormous upfront carbon emissions for a long-term saving. We are spending a resource we don't have in order to have the pleasure of spending it, rather than because we're actually meeting an urgent need. I think this is a much, much more all-encompassing problem than winter sports, and I agree that they're a particularly poignant place to look at it because they are contributing their share to their own annihilation through increasing warming.
Vanda Bonardo, the president of the International Committee for the Protection of the Alps and a mountain native, told me,
Le Alpi sono il sistema montuoso più infrastrutturato al mondo. C'è un problema di artificializzazione della montagna. Questo cemento non sarà mai più tolto da questi luoghi. Nel dopoguerra il mondo dell'industria ha affrontato, con lo stesso atteggiamento che ha affrontato l'industrializzazione dei paesi, ha affrontato la montagna. Quindi la montagna è stata vista come una colonia della città. La montagna è il luogo dove i cittadini ripropongono un modello di città e non vanno in montagna perché vogliono la montagna, ma in montagna vogliono gli stessi servizi della città. E questo non è una buona cosa, perché se uno vuole certe comodità può starsene, scusatemi, in città.
compiling a report for the environmental pressure group Legambiente, Vanda made a discovery that has set the winter sports industry reeling.
Frequentando le montagne negli anni passati, io mi sono accorta che sempre di più in giro per le montagne ci sono degli impianti dismessi. E da lì ho incominciato la ricerca insieme ad altre persone e da lì è iniziato il lavoro del dossier Neve Diversa di Legambiente.
The Legambiente's shocking investigation details no fewer than 265 abandoned ski facilities in Italy alone.
Ogni anno c'è qualcosa in più che si chiude e viene abbandonato, quindi lasciato a se stesso con tutto quel che ne può conseguire, perché rimane una sorta di ecomostro in mezzo alle montagne. Proprio in conseguenza di questo cambiamento climatico, spesso ci sono degli impianti chiusi e non si sa se saranno abbandonati o se saranno riaperti. E sono veramente in una situazione critica, per cui non sanno se e quando apriranno, come apriranno. Quindi ci sono parecchi impianti che rimangono un po' aperti, un po' chiusi.
The opening ceremony of the 25th Winter Olympic Games starts tonight at 8 p.m, culminating in the lighting of the Olympic cauldron. The doors open 3 hours in advance, not at a winter sports venue, but here at the San Siro football stadium, the Stadio Giuseppe Meazza, the home of both Inter and Milan. Because of the ceremony, the Serie A match between Milan and Como had to be moved, and the plan made public in July 2025 was to hold it in Perth, Australia. UEFA and Serie A were both happy, although in the event the trip was cancelled, not because it was ridiculous to make two teams based 45 kilometres apart fly 14,000 kilometres for one game in the middle of an emissions crisis, but because too many football interests wanted a share of the action. The other plan for the cherished stadium is to tear down its massive concrete carcass and build something with more profit-making areas. The architect and environmentalist Dr. Barnabas Calder takes issue with the broader mindset behind it.
Competitive sport, which is economically enhanced by stadium regeneration, is a microcosm of a worldwide problem that we are perpetrating these harms not because we don't have something that works okay at the moment, but because someone else has something better, and better in big sarcastic quotation marks, something newer, bigger, more energy hungry. And therefore there's a kind of competitive basis to so much in our world economy that pushes us to keep up and to see that as a necessity because someone else has got it, and that's what makes it into a necessity for us to have it. And in competitive sport you see it is absolutely clearest because they bring in more money, they can afford more expensive players and so on, and more fans and more corporate activity, and the cycle continues. But that same locally defined sense of necessity is driving huge amounts of destruction, a vast proportion, enough of the destruction of our atmosphere and our ecosystems is related to competitive unnecessary excess, to mean that if we just stopped that, we could save the situation and allow those who genuinely don't have enough to have enough. And the structures of debt and competition are trapping us into this situation where we know we're doing the wrong thing. It's deeply clear to everyone who isn't in full-on Alice in Wonderland denial that we are doing the wrong thing, and everything is an exception. You know, you look at any one thing and it's less than 1% of the problem. But it's an awful lot of tiny problems mounting together into one unbelievably enormous problem. And that fundamental attitude that we've got to have the best, can we make it a bit less harmful, needs to change to one of what can we have and what should we have to live a really good life sustainably, and not in the sense of greenwashed sustainably, but in a way that really does allow everyone else to live a good life too. And happiness and health are not aligned to the wild excess of consumption that we're trapped in.
Milano rispetto alle Olimpiadi è sempre
Milan has been somewhat overlooked because of Cortina's bobsleigh track, as if the problem with the Olympics was up there. According to Duccio Facchini, the director of the alternative economics magazine Altra Economia, the very visible bobsleigh run scandal at Cortina has been useful to some, obscuring as it does the fact that the real Winter Olympics game is being played in Milan. That's where the powerful interests are, and that's where the real money is to be made in mass events like sport, music, and other live performances. Which brings us to the Santa Giulia Arena, the home of men's ice hockey at the Winter Olympics. Now, the heartlands of ice hockey in Italy are high in the Tyrol, and the main Italian teams, Bolzano, Merano and Cortina, play in the Austrian League. To fans and players there, the allocation of the main Winter Olympic ice hockey tournament to Milan is a betrayal. With NHL players returning to the Winter Games for the first time since 2014, a non-standard rink size and a tight race to meet the deadline, the Santa Giulia Arena has barely been out of the news. Altra Economia's investigation revealed that Milan City Council designated the area an essential construction and a private structure of public interest, then granted the owners big tax breaks.
La Regione Lombardia.
The Lombardy region is using regional taxation from the public purse to pay for the €12 million road interchange serving the arena. The municipality of Milan is putting up €7 million to build temporary roads to reach the arena, which will be destroyed the second the event has finished because there are no underground utilities.
According to Altra Economia, additional costs, some of them attributable to the pandemic, and then Russia's war on Ukraine, were borne by the public purse, although the plans, obtained and published by Altra Economia, show seating opposite a stage area at one end, not a central field of play, suggesting that the arena wasn't conceived of as a sports hall for the Winter Olympics, but as a concert venue, which is blindingly obvious when you know it was built by the German company Eventim, Europe's biggest live music business.
Teoricamente non doveva andare così.
It wasn't supposed to be like this. The arena was supposed to be built by the private sector. End of story. Instead, the state has already allocated €51 million of public money for the arena. Wow, they hit the jackpot. They really hit the jackpot.
Caspita, hanno fatto bingo. Hanno fatto proprio bingo. C'è questo...
So there's an imbalance between private and public interests. To make matters worse, not only do private interests always win, but they always win with the support of public funds. We see it at the arena and at the Olympic Village too.
Preciso.
Altra Economia also discovered that the city has secured the use of the arena 2 days a year for events of 4,000 plus people, free of charge but for basic services, electricity, air conditioning, heating, cleaning, etc. Meanwhile, its commitments to provide taxpayers near the arena with public transport have been quietly allowed to slip.
A Santa Giulia, per esempio, era stato promesso alla collettività.
At Santa Giulia, the community was promised a tram connection during the Olympics in an area that was disadvantaged in transport terms. But the tramway will not arrive in the promised time frame.
Non arriverà nei tempi che sono stati promessi.
Nothing's without a context, and the journalist Lucia Tozzi describes a recent history of corruption and communities, especially poorer ones, left without essential services.
Adesso sembra semplicemente un posto così, uno sviluppo un po' strano, confinante con uno strano nodo autostradale, ma in realtà è stato il più grande fallimento dell'urbanistica milanese agli inizi degli anni 2000. Era considerato il vero quartiere Santa Giulia, il grande quartiere di risanamento, il grande quartiere del futuro. C'era un progetto di Norman Foster, è stata la prima retorica green che è calata su Milano. Prima non esisteva la retorica green di fatto, e invece c'era questo sviluppo annunciato, sarà stupendo eccetera, e invece finirono tutti in galera malamente. Cioè fu uno scandalo terribile di false bonifiche eccetera eccetera, e si arrestò a metà, per cui per un certo periodo gli abitanti che nel frattempo avevano comprato le case si sono trovati per 10 anni, 10-15 anni, in una specie di zona desolata, popolata solo dagli uffici fiscali.
Santa Giulia borders on open countryside and working class Corvetto to the south, and to the north Porta Romana, where the Olympic Village is built.
Quest'area viene chiamata a questo punto il triangolo d'oro della rigenerazione urbana, proprio così, ma non da noi, proprio dal comune e dagli investitori.
This is what Tozzi, Facchini and others call the Milan model, in which property and financial speculation are perhaps too close to the public purse.
A Milano c'è sempre questa equazione per cui
In Milan, the equation is always the same. They sell you a great urban regeneration project, they promise you the moon in terms of giving back to the community, then, without fail, the private sector hits the jackpot at the expense of the community.
jackpot, la collettività no.
The journalist and Milan native Filippo Kautz laments the absence of any Olympic legacy for the ordinary people of the city.
Do these Olympics give us something for the sports of the people? No, nothing. The idea was to do something temporary and then back to business.
For a striking image of sport's ambiguous role in Milan, you only have to visit the campus of its most prestigious educational institution, Bocconi. Built by Tokyo architect Sanar in 2019, it offers everything a modern university needs to compete in the world marketplace. elite education, world-class sports facilities and dazzling architecture. But the high-tech surround serves to exclude as well as demarcate the queue for the food bank run by the charity Pane Quotidiano, which offers daily bread to the needy, extends almost as far as the university entrance. And the Winter Olympics took place in a citywide housing crisis.
Of 60,000 social housing units in Milan, 10 to 15,000 are empty, and there's a waiting list of 25,000 families. Very strange, very strange. They want to sell them.
As we've seen, some saw the Games as an exercise in every kind of speculation and an indifferent witness to social inequality. For others, they promoted a host of problematic sponsors, not least the oil company Eni, whose website says they support the energy transition and aim to reach net zero by 2050. For another description, listen to Greenpeace Italy's Federico Spadini.
Eni is the major Italian oil and gas company, but it's also one of the most polluting and one of the major greenhouse gas emitters all over the world. It's partially owned by the Italian state, but it has a huge power to influence the energy policies of governments, especially the Italian government. And it's also doing a lot of greenwashing and sport washing, trying to associate their brand to important and beloved events like musical festivals or, in this case, the Winter Olympics and Paralympics. Also, Eni is the main sponsor, the title sponsor of the Serie A, the Italian major football league. And as people know, football is a very, big thing in Italy.
Sponsored by the very high carbon polluters who scientists say are damaging the Earth's atmosphere and defuturing not just winter sport, but life on Earth, they could have been called the Cognitive Dissonance Games. Yet it wasn't long ago that the Olympic movement took decisive action over its sponsorship partners to safeguard global public well-being.
When we look at the past of the Olympics, we can see that they've got some track record for making things better. In fact, the Winter Olympics itself has got a big precedent for making positive progressive change. If we go back to Calgary in 1988, as a consequence of activism by skiers and also a big lobby from the health sector, that was one of the first big global sports events that dropped tobacco sponsorship. And it was a real catalyst. After that, the Olympic movement more generally got behind it. We saw national legislation coming in the host country, Canada, and we saw the role that ultimately led to tobacco sponsorship and advertising becoming widely illegal.
After the ban, big oil and other massive polluters stepped into the tobacco industry's shoes, sponsoring sports and cultural mega-events. In October 2025, a huge sports sponsor and polluter, Total Energies, was found guilty of misleading advertising for claiming, like the Winter Olympics sponsor Eni, to be a major player in the so-called energy transition. The lawyer Johnny White of the NGO Client Earth, a member of the legal team which secured the verdict, explains why these companies expose themselves by sponsoring global events like the Winter Olympics.
They do it because they think it has financial value for them to sell their product. And if they're successful in that, then we will not tackle climate change because we need to reduce fossil fuels to do that. The analogy here, the precedent, is with tobacco. Tobacco was another harmful product where the world eventually took action to completely prohibit not only advertising, but also all the other ways that the tobacco industry tried to increase the sales of its product. That included sponsorship, it included taking part in educational activities, it meant giving citizens public information about the harms of the product, and that's what the international treaty, the Tobacco Control Convention, does.
The international tobacco legislation is remarkably complete and free of the loopholes exploited by the fossil fuel industry.
So one of the things that's prohibited for tobacco is something called brand stretching. This is where a brand that has a problem with its environmental responsibility, like Total Energies, like Eni, will associate itself, advertise something else that's positive in order to gain the overall benefit for the overall brand and to continue to sell the main product, which is fossil fuels. And that kind of strategy is exactly why companies like TotalEnergies sponsor and spend large sums on sponsoring sporting events.
The oil company Eni, Italy's biggest greenhouse gas emitter, is providing the Winter Games with a range of services and products with lower greenhouse gas emissions. It sounds great, except that according to a 2024 Greenpeace and Recommon report, for every euro invested in its Plenitude business, its low-carbon division, in 2022, Eni invested more than 15 euros in oil and gas. However, considering the Plenitude division also includes non-renewable energy activities, such as gas marketing and retail that are still its main activities, for every euro invested in fossil fuels, less than 7 cents were invested in sustainable renewable energies. For every euro invested in Plenitude in 2022, more than 11 euros were distributed to shareholders through dividends and share buyback. So that's what the Games had become, a vehicle for classic brand stretching. And Eni was one of no fewer than 10 premium partners who were actually publicly owned, at least in part, like the energy utility Enel, the National Railway and Postal Services, and the company providing communications equipment, Leonardo, majority owned by the Italian state. In fact, an investigation by the newspaper Domani alleges that current Italian Defence Minister Guido Crosetto was a consultant for Leonardo from 2018 to 2021, earning 1.8 million euros. Leonardo's tentacles extend across the globe, including to Edinburgh, where Scottish Green City Councillor Ben Parker uncovered a bizarre story.
Leonardo have a factory site in Edinburgh, and this is where they produce components which are used in the fighter jets which are being used as part of the genocide in Palestine at the moment.
This is confirmed by the Campaign Against the Arms Trade website, which says Leonardo UK is notable for producing laser targeting components for F-35 fighter jets, used extensively by the Israeli military in Gaza.
We've done a lot of work finding out more about the links that Leonardo have in the city, and I think what we see, as is often the case with arms companies, fossil fuel companies, is that they're doing a lot of work to try and clean up their image, when we know that actually this is a company that profits from war and profits from destruction. So, for example, we have seen in the city Leonardo hosting events with primary schools. We have seen Leonardo advertising on trams and buses, something we're putting a stop to with our advertising and sponsorship policy as well. But most egregiously, we've seen them using public land to test their communications equipment. We discovered late last year that Leonardo was using the council's parks and green space to test some of its communications equipment. Managed to bring forward a motion which saw that practice banned, but the reason why we were able to get that commitment made within the council's rules which govern the use of parks and green space was precisely because there was such a large public outcry about the fact that actually, the city council was at that point in time facilitating arms companies being able to use public land and public space in that way, which was completely unacceptable.
On the 12th of February, the IOC banned Ukrainian Vladislav Heraskevich for wearing images of friends who were also athletes killed during Russia's unprovoked attack on their country. The ruling, justified by the principle that the Olympic Games is neutral and must be separate from political, religious and any other type of interference, was made in front of a backdrop promoting any accused of contributing significantly to global warming, and Leonardo, the subject of legal action by the Italian NGO Un Ponte Per, who ask how Leonardo can legally sell weapons to Israel, given that Article 11 of its owner's constitution rejects war as an instrument of aggression against the freedom of other peoples and as a means for the settlement of international disputes.
This sort of company does not fit with our ideas about what we want to see for the future of the world, and it's really inappropriate for public space to be given away to companies like this so that they can clean up their image.
Imagine what the Olympics would look like if they took the same approach. Instead, the question is this: where does their involvement with Leonardo, the world's 13th biggest arms manufacturer, with revenues of $18 billion in 2024 and orders of $21 billion, leave the Olympic truce and the Games' commitment to building a better and more peaceful world through sport and the Olympic ideal? For Ben Parker, politics, big business and major events like the Winter Olympics are way behind public opinion,
I think it's definitely the case that members of the public are ahead of the curve on this.
A New Weather Institute survey carried out just before the Games tested this.
So we often talk about these issues, we worries about climate change and how it's affecting things, but often we don't get a really clear picture of what the public are thinking. So where the Winter Olympics are concerned, we thought, well, let's talk to people in some of the leading ski nations and also in the UK where winter sports, skating and skiing are still really popular. Let's find out what the public are thinking. So first of all, what we found is that there is a genuine worry about the loss of snow. At some level, people are understanding that climate change, global heating, this fundamental shift in the chemistry of the atmosphere that comes from our own pollution is affecting things that people care about. When we look at two key nations that are going to be in the public spotlight, Italy in 2026 because of the Winter Olympics being hosted there, and France, which is set to host the next Winter Olympics in 2030, what's really striking there is that around over 2/3 of people are afraid about the loss of snow. But when we look at those two nations again and ask them what do they think about the fact that you've got big polluters like oil companies and airlines and car makers sponsoring these winter games, whose pollution is driving global heating, which is the big threat to snow and winter sports, well, there we've got around about 8 out of 10 people think that this practice should stop, that winter sports should stop being a billboard for major polluters. So a really clear indication that people are not happy. They understand there's a contradiction between these two things and they want to see that practice ended.
So for many Italians I spoke to during the Winter Olympics, sport in the age of the climate crisis has become not a transparent, community-building celebration of athletic excellence, sensitive to the natural world, and also responsibly engaged with the many pressing issues affecting our continued planetary existence, but a top-down, backward-looking, heavily financialized mix of speculation, mega construction and deforestation, faking neutrality while also fully aligned with a whole array of highly problematic sponsors and treating local communities as little more than cash cows. Here's Andrew Sims.
Humanity is changing the chemistry of the atmosphere in such a way that it's putting athletes, fans and sport itself at risk. And it's all down to the burning of fossil fuels. And part of the problem is that we see this as now being completely normal. And if you have a major sport event sponsored by an oil company, an airline, and a car maker, all the big industries who are a major part of the problem, it makes this seem normal. And as long as it seems normal, it's going to be much harder to change.